About a month ago, I bought these 2 boxes of Necron Triarch Praetorians. And Praetorians are kind of an oddball unit. They got a little bit of speed and a little bit of punching, but really I bought these because it's a dual build kit that can also build Necron Lich Guard. And Lich Guard are a close combat powerhouse. They can be built into an absolute Death Star with the right heroes attached to it. And I saw a really cool tournament list online that was running 3 10-man bricks of Lich Guard. And I kind of thought to myself, I have no Lich Guard, and so maybe I try to go hard in a Lich Guard. And I bought these 2 boxes to get started on the journey. But then they sat on my shelf for a month, and the more I look at them, the more I think Praetorians are pretty cool. I've been collecting Necrons since high school. They were my first ever Warhammer purchase, and I never put together any Triarch Praetorians. They are a classic Necron kit. A lot of very, very small fiddly parts that all go together like a Lego man. Legs, body, separate arms, and weapons. Even though this kit is getting on in age, the mold lines aren't too bad, and the fit and finish is pretty good. I have 10 of these suckers to do, and I think getting the bases done early will help me get the best poses possible. I started out sinking some magnets into Cobalt Keep bases. I've learned to do this first, because sometimes it's a tight fit, and I would rather squeeze the bases without a finished model on there. Now my Necrons are wandering through a yellow sulfur wasteland, and to make these bases, I grabbed some cork. Some 1/2, 1/4, and 1/8 inch cork, and I glued these down, splitting them evenly. This will give me some variety and make the bases look more natural. I started hacking away at my cork. On the big pieces, I used a saw to cut them up on an angle, and I ripped and tore my fingers to break up the cork, revealing the natural texture. I used some of the scraps I just tore off to re-glue in places to get some nice irregular shapes, and after some messing around, I had 10 irregular bases. At this point, the bases aren't done, but I want to glue the legs down. These Necron feet are just big enough that I don't feel like I need to pin them. While I was gluing these, I made any edits necessary to the cork to get the feet planted firmly, and I glued them down so that they were nicely centered, and then I scooched them back just a little bit so their bodies will hang nicely over the bases. With the legs on, I grabbed some wood glue and a few different grits of sand. This is playground sand that I graded with kitchen strainers years ago, and they've worked pretty well. On each guy, I did 2 or 3 little blobs of glue and gave each one a spritzing of pebbles and then a splash of medium and fine grit sand to bring a little bit of coarse texture into the flat parts of the bases. Where I didn't put sand down, I spread some texture paste over the cork. This 3-tiered approach gives a lot of variety to the bases. Now I've got my legs done, I almost forgot Praetorians have tails. I don't know why they have tails. Maybe Necrotire had tails back when they were flesh and blood. Or maybe it's just another thing Games Workshop thought of to differentiate these guys from the Lich Guard. I've got all my little Praetorian butts ready to go. It has been a hot minute since I've worked on this kit, but I have actually put it together before. In high school, I put together a 5-man squad of Lich Guard. These are painted in my original high school blue and white, and they're on 25mm bases, because back in the day, they stood on 25s, and I glued nickels under the bases because these models are really, really tippy. I'm much more confident with the new 32mm base than I was the old 25. I don't know why I never repainted these guys. I repainted the rest of my Necron army, but these guys have just sat in a drawer for like the last 7 years. I'm pretty sure the last time I brought these guys in a game, it was Warhammer 6th edition. It would be kind of fun to get them back on the tabletop, but I would want more than 5. I'd want at least maybe 2 5-man squads, or maybe a big juicy 10 brick with attached lord to really see what they can do. I've got the Praetorians half done, and now I have a really, really hard decision to make. These guys have 2 weapon options, and they're both really good. Praetorians can be equipped with the Rod of Covenant or the Particle Caster and Void Blades. The staffs are fewer, more powerful shots and punches, and the pistols and knives are a boatload of low power attacks. Honestly, I don't know which one I prefer. I think I like the rods more. They feel more royal Necron weapons, where the Particle Casters and Void Blades look a little too high tech. The Necrons are the highest possible tech, and I feel like magical staffs feel more correct than things that actually look like guns. I still have some time before I need to make a final decision. I started gluing the bodies together. The chests come in 2 halves, and there is an unsightly seam running between the 2. To fix this, I grabbed some Tamiya putty and spread it over the gap with a toothpick. Once that was dry, I sanded these spots smooth, and it was really hard to get in there even with a sanding twig. And to really get the job done, I cut a twig in half so I could thread it in between the shoulder and ribs. Eventually, I got these all nice and squared away. They have these back rib cages, which I don't think I'm gonna glue on yet. It'll make painting much easier. I started cutting out the rods, and I'm like 51% sure the rods are the right choice. Each staff needs 2 hands, a stick, and the business end, and this is incredibly tricky to glue. These are skinny little arms with tiny wrists, and it's all gotta get glued at the same time. The shoulders are ball joints, so they tend to slip and slide around, and I had to very carefully hold these pieces perfectly still for a while so the glue would hold. After enough time, I eventually got all the Praetorians holding their rods, and now I can glue them down, but I have a fun opportunity. These guys are a little short for members of the Necron elite. I mixed up some green stuff and made some little balls and I shoved them into their torsos. This will give my boys some extra height. With the goo balls in place, I stuck them down and this also gave me some extra posing, so I could pair the legs with the arms that looked the best, and stood over the base really well. These guys are kinda bad for overhanging the bases, but I did my best to keep them in their airspace. Now that I have my poses, I can attach the heads and make sure they're looking in the right direction. These tiny, smaller than a pin-sized heads were really hard to mount on their tiny necks, but eventually I made it happen. I have been agonizing over the weapon loadouts for these guys, whether to go with the rod or the particle caster and blade, and I'm feeling much better about my decision now that I have crunched the numbers, and it looks like mathematically the rods are better in almost all scenarios. The caster throws out way more attacks, but it doesn't really matter because the AP-2 damage 2 of the rods is just better in most scenarios. And speaking of those scenarios, I kind of have a very specific scenario in mind. It's the reason I wanted these guys in the first place. These Triarch Praetorians are remarkably similar to, but maybe just a little bit better than my 2 squads of Necron Locust Destroyers. These guys are great, they're nice and speedy, they're pretty tanky, they actually do a good job at shooting, and the way I use these guys is I leave them in strategic reserve until turn 2 or usually turn 3, when they show up on the battlefield and cause a problem. And they've been doing a really good job of that. But these guys have very similar stats, especially in 5-man squads, but their stats are just a little bit better, and they've got a little bit of shenanigans that these guys don't have. The Locust Destroyers have movement 8, the Praetorians have movement 10. These guys don't want to be in close combat, the Praetorians do. And the Locusts can take advantage of strategic reserve, but the Praetorians have deep strike and a special ability, fall back and charge, which is just another little added movement bonus, and I really want these guys to be moving. Their job is to steal objectives away from my opponents and secure secondaries. The Locusts have been doing an okay job at that, but I'm wondering if the Praetorians are gonna do a really good job at that. The Locust Destroyers are definitely tankier at 3 wounds, toughness 6, 3-up save versus 2 wounds, toughness 5, 3-up save. But 90 points to 100 points, really similar in points. It's kinda just 2 different flavors of the same thing. And I wanna try out a new flavor. It might be better. I'm just gonna have to play with it and see what happens. Before I get to play though, they have to be painted. My Necrons are white, so I started off with a black prime. Then I gave each of them a base coat of gray. This brightens them up and I want their recesses dark but not black. It doesn't make sense that white armor Necrons would ever be black in the shadows. Now it's time for the white. I used white ink to zenithal over the tops of their bodies. Then I gave each of them a satin varnish to protect this fragile ink layer. The next step is adding a little battle damage. I took white paint and sponged this over their bodies. These aren't paint chips, just little dings and scratches that are reflecting the sun, and so they look a little bit brighter than the surrounding body. It's a nice way to make them look more weathered without darkening them with paint chips. Next up, the gold. The Praetorians should have gold as they are members of the Necron nobility. I hit their shoulders with a brush, but for their backs I used the airbrush. These backs are crazy detailed and spiky, and if I brush this on, the paint would want to flow into the cracks and get gummy, especially metallic paints, which tend to be a little bit thicker. After a few blasts, these spines were looking perfect, but I don't want to glue them on just yet. Now that I have the base coats on there, I can add in the weathering. And this means stealing Nick's black panel liner and dripping it into all the Necron cracks. This slides into all the little trenches on the mini and gives them a really good clean black line. Now my Necron bodies are done, it's time to work on the decorations, starting with reddening the balls. I used some ink to blast over the Necron balls, giving them a little object source lighting. I also sprayed this on the inside of the rib cages as well. I don't know how much anyone will be able to see, but it should be there. Now I have to paint all the balls. I started out by base coating them with a dark red, and then I did a very large circle of a lighter red. Then another smaller circle of red, and then orange, and then yellow. I made each pass a little bit smaller so I had steps in color to create a gradient from dark red to a nearly white yellow. This makes their balls extremely eye-catching. I did the same thing for the little one on their foreheads too. With the Necron orbs done, I finally glued the back ribs on and I can finish up the metal. I gave the ribs a wash of Reikland Flesh shade to make them a little orangey and more dark and saturated in the recesses. Then I gave these ribs a dry brushing of silver and then a sponging of silver to keep the beat up look of their armor going. I gave the handle of their staffs a coat of black speed paint, and then it was time for those rods. I want these glowing red like the balls, so I need to brighten them up. Step 1, some warm white. Then I sprayed a stripe of dark red right along the bottom. Then a stripe of a bright red right in the middle, then a stripe of orange towards the tip. Now I have a good gradient going, but I feel like the off-white didn't get as bright as I would like it to, so I used some white ink to make the tips extremely white. Then I finished it off with a spray of yellow contrast paint, which is the best way I've found to get the brightest yellow possible. And you know what else I like as bright as possible? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find merch like our EOB dice, wet pallets, water slide decals, and basing toppers and bits. It's also the best way to support us with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly train packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This month, we have the Faraway Galaxy Bundle, a battlefield's worth of sci-fi buildings with a clever removable door and roof system for easy access. These buildings print easily and are perfect for cutting a battlefield into a dangerous urban maze. There's also plenty of cargo containers and barricades, including the XT6 cargo sled for moving all these accessories around the war zone. This set is perfect for quickly setting up a thematic battle on any system, planet, or moon. This set will be on EonsOfBattle.com for the month of July, and then it'll be gone. Now I have my gradient on there, it's time to get a little fancy. I used white ink to drip in all the cracks of these weapons. I dipped a loaded brush on the corner and let it flow through the cracks. Then I carefully edge highlighted everything. I used an orange for the lower half and then brighter yellow for the upper half. These energy spears are getting close. I picked out all the balls in the middle with some red paint, and I painted the little energy battery in the handle with a gradient from dark red up to orange. And on the back of these spears, I used the same gold mix I used on their armor. Overall, I'm glad I went with the rods, both for the rules and for the looks. So many Necron sticks, but these guys are getting really close. The Necron Triarch Praetorians, they kind of feel like another Necron mid-tier unit like the Death Marks or the Necron Immortals, but these guys actually hold a really wonky place in Necron hierarchy. The Necron faction is broken down into dynasties, and these dynasties are led by lords and overlords, but at the tippy top of the Necron pyramid is the Triarch, the three most powerful commanding Necrons who are in charge of everything, and to make sure that their will is done, there are the Praetorians. It's not exactly the same, but it's a lot like the Emperor and his Custodes. The Emperor is in charge of everything, and the Custodes make sure that it happens. Now, the problem is there is no Triarch. The last king was Cesaric, the Silent King, who's kind of back, but kind of not really. So the Praetorians have kind of been left to their own devices for the last 60 million years. So what have the Praetorians been up to? Same ol', keeping the overlords in line, making sure that the Necron codes of war are being followed, and helping out in the occasional battle. Why? Because they can't do anything else. The Necrons are so thoroughly doomed that they have no ability to evolve or change. These Praetorians are the exact same Praetorians that were protecting the flesh and blood Triarchs back before biotransference. They will continue to exist like this forever. Until the heat death of the universe. They're just the Triarch Praetorians, and they have to do their job. The Triarch Praetorians actually didn't participate in the Great Sleep and have been active in the galaxy for the entire 60 million years since the War in Heaven, and would probably make pretty good rulers for modern Necrons. But that can't happen because that is not their official role. They're just trapped as Necron cops forever. I love the Necrons. Their lore is such a downer. Time to do some basing. For my bases, I like to do a hot sulfur yellow, so to start out, I carefully airbrush some warm white over the bases. I want to get rid of as much of the black primer as possible. Then I gave the bases a dry brushing with the same color to further brighten them up. Now for the secret sauce. Literally, I made up a sauce of red pigment powder mixed with a little flow aid and a lot of water. I lathered up the bases with this, and once I had one solid coat down, I gave each base a few spurts of water to wash this mix off the high points, and then I set them aside to dry. Once that was done, it was time for the Indian yellow. This is the brightest yellow I have found, and it turns the little bit of white paint sticking out into nearly fluorescent yellow. With the bases done, the only thing left was to rim them with gray. I used gray for my Necrons because there's so much black on the mini. The color palette is so small, I only want black to show up on my Kron bodies, not on the bases. 10 Necron Triarch Praetorians. Oh, I've only seen these guys in person one other time at a tournament I was playing at. They're pretty cool. I've been really getting back into my Necrons, and I've been adding a lot of units that I didn't have back in high school or didn't exist back when I was collecting Necrons in high school. And now that I've got these suckers, I am really excited to try them out in the list. The Triarch Praetorians are a pretty neat little Necron unit. I don't know if they're gonna be good, but I have a hunch because unusual for Necrons, they're pretty darn quick, they can shoot okay, and they can punch pretty good. And honestly, I don't need them to do much in my list. They're gonna be just waiting around in Deep Strike Reserve for the perfect moment to drop down with their little Necron jetpacks and just do a little something. Maybe bully my opponent off of an objective or score me a secondary mission card. Oh, I am looking forward to it. I've really been enjoying adding to my Necron collection, and I feel like I'm getting awful close to putting together Silent King. Silent King would go really nicely with some Praetorians. and some Lich Guard. I bought these boxes to be Lich Guard, but I might have to buy more boxes because I probably should have Lich Guard in my army. Thanks for watching.